The hangar had no name. It was a sand-scoured sheet metal structure on the edge of a forward logistics zone, surrounded by rusted containers, camo netting, and old equipment that hummed when the wind came in from the coast. Inside, the air was thick with heat and dust, stirred occasionally by the ripple of a rotor wash in the distance. Light filtered in through seams in the wall panels, forming thin bars across the floor like slats in a holding cell. Lieutenant Commander Reagan Cole stood near a crate used as a makeshift table, shoulders square beneath her plate carrier, her eyes fixed on the mission packet in her hands. The folder had no seal. Its spine was cracked, corners bent from prior hands. Every third page was blocked in black ink. She read each one anyway, not for content, but for shape, for rhythm, for what was absent. The final sheet was blank except for a line of latitude, a timestamp, and the word non-attributed. Behind her, 4 men and 1 woman moved through pre-jump checks without speaking. Gear was laid out with exact spacing. Magazines tapped once before pouching. The only sound in the hangar came from zippers, Velcro, and the low, hydraulic hiss of an oxygen rig test. No music played, no idle talk passed between them. This wasn't that kind of mission. Reagan flipped the laminated comms overlay to the second tab and ran one finger along a faint blue route marker traced over scrubland. Someone had circled a fallback vector in red and written one word in block ink beside it, deny. She made no comment. Her watch buzzed softly against her wrist. She didn't look at it immediately. Time didn't own her here. When she did check, the display read 22:42, 17 minutes ahead of drop sequence. There was no commander present, no operations brief read aloud. What passed for orders had arrived 2 hours prior as a courier envelope from an unnamed pilot off a C-17 that didn't log its arrival. It contained a packet, 2 encrypted comms bursts, and a reminder that the United States had no footprint in the Horn of Africa at this time. She folded the map without creasing it and tucked it behind her backplate. Her hands moved without pause, left glove on, right next. A final press on the seal tabs confirmed the dragline wasn't exposed. She crouched once to check the tightness of her leg rig. Then she stood again, tall and balanced, scanning the edges of the hangar like she was measuring something no one else had seen. To her left, Chief Petty Officer Gaines secured the latches on a comms pack, then looked over. No words, just a slight nod. Reagan answered with one in return. It was the only confirmation either of them would get. A single aircraft sat on the tarmac outside, its bay door open. No lights, just the silhouette of a transport bird big enough to swallow them whole. Its skin was matte gray, unmarked. She reached under her vest and pulled the dog tags free, letting them hang for a second. They tapped once against her glove. No name spoken, no reflection caught. Then she slid them back beneath the carrier, pressing them flat to her chest before sealing the vest tight across her sternum. She looked down the line. The team was already syncing watches. She walked the length of them without speaking. Each one raised their wrist. No roll call, no last checks, just a shared glance that held all the weight of a signed order. Reagan stopped by the exit ramp, her figure framed by the dim light bleeding in from the hangar edge. The dust shifted once beneath her boot. Then she stepped forward and disappeared into shadow. Behind her, the others followed silent, steady and nameless. The ramp opened into nothing, just wind and blackness, stretching wide across the Horn of Africa like a dry sea with no edge. Inside the aircraft, there was no light but the faint green glow of instrument panels and the pulsing node on the altimeter, strapped to Reagan Cole's wrist. She stood at the front of the line, boots squared against the yellow strip of tape that marked the edge, her hand gripping the side rail. No one spoke. The cabin was silent except for the low, constant rush of pressurized air and the soft rasp of oxygen regulators tightening with each breath. She turned once to glance at her team. 5 figures, all masked, visors down, chutes aligned, one nod from Gaines, nothing from the others. No one needed more. The pilot never looked back. At 28,000 feet, there was no room for second guessing. Reagan stepped into the void. The first moment was inertia, no feeling of falling, only release. The aircraft slipped away behind her, vanishing like it had never existed. The wind hit her chest in one solid sheet. Her limbs moved, untrained muscle arms crossed. legs tight, body aligned with the descent vector. Her altimeter flashed once in green at her wrist, a brief flicker of orientation before the sky swallowed her whole. She rotated slightly to stabilize. Her breath echoed inside the mask, steady, metronomic. Each inhale filtered, each exhale muffled against the plastic seal. It was the only sound, even the air. Screaming around her seemed to flatten beneath the hum of regulated breath. She lowered her head and scanned through the goggles. The world emerged in bands of luminous green. Far below, ridgelines blurred into each other, broken only by shallow heat traces clinging to stone. The desert floor held no lights, no beacons. The designated drop zone flickered once in the corner of her HUD. Cold. Wide. Still. But something else had caught her attention. 200 meters to the south, a vertical streak of thermal bloom pulsed beneath a collapsed bluff. It wasn't part of the briefed structure layout. She angled her descent with a minor adjustment, slight pitch to the left, a toe pressure to correct drag. No call made, no command issued. This wasn't something she needed permission to investigate. It was the kind of anomaly the others would miss, caught in procedural descent. Her altimeter pulsed again. 10,000 feet. A gust clipped her right shoulder, throwing a slight rotational drift. She adjusted without thinking. One hand out, one ankle kicked back into alignment. The dark rolled beneath her, textureless except in the lens view, where the bloom now resolved into 3 heat clusters. Moving. Low to the ground. Too wide for livestock. Too cold for engine exhaust. People. Grounded. Waiting. 5,000. She braced, unlatched the chute release, and kept her body tight as the green LZ symbol began to veer off the edge of the HUD grid. She was no longer aligned with the programmed drop. 2,000. She dropped fast into a slope, rocky and uneven, no visible approach route. Her knees bent as the chute caught and slowed the final plunge. The landing was hard heel, knee, shoulder, the kind of landing you don't plan but train for. She rolled once, exhaled sharply through the mask, then went still. Dust settled around her, invisible in real light, brilliant in green overlay. She stayed prone for 3 long breaths. Nothing moved nearby. No voices on the net. No confirmation ping. She didn't expect one. Slowly, she rose into a crouch and looked up. Above, 3 canopies floated gently toward a flat zone half a click northeast. Perfect landing pattern. Perfect vector. Perfectly wrong. She could already see the slope's heat curve narrowing where they were headed too open. Too clean. Someone had tampered with the thermal map. She switched to magnification and scanned the far ridge. A slight distortion, maybe a camo net drawn across a broken wall. It flickered once, then vanished in haze. A man-made pattern, not natural compression. Still crouched, she pulled her compass from her vest, checked heading, then marked her position mentally. The air was dry but not silent. A thin whistle moved between rock fissures. No radio clicks, no movement pings, no infrared flares. She pressed 2 fingers into the dirt and rubbed it between her gloves. Dry but not static. Residual warmth in the soil meant recent movement. She turned west, toward the anomaly. No signal sent. No record made. She adjusted her pack straps, tightened her mask, and moved in silence along the slope. Angling lower, not toward the others, but away. Her boots slid twice on loose shale, but she caught herself both times without sound. Her breath, still steady inside the mask, remained the only rhythm. Somewhere above her, someone was logging her as off-pattern. She didn't care. She carried the authority in her actions. No applause, no confirmation. Just breath, green clarity, and movement into the dark. The outer wall of the compound had long since caved in. Its concrete blocks sun-bleached and eroded into rough teeth that jutted out beneath camouflage netting. No banners flew, no lights marked sentry posts. The place was silent in that deceptive way. Old places can be like something had been emptied quickly and thoroughly, but left to rot with purpose. Reagan Cole moved low along the inner edge of the breach, her carbine angled just above horizontal, eyes sweeping the compound interior. Beside her, Harris mirrored the motion, 1 pace behind and 1 foot to the left, offset for blind spots. Neither spoke. Their breathing stayed quiet beneath their masks, broken only by the occasional rasp of gravel underfoot or the groan of metal twisted in the wind. Ahead, the main corridor of the compound opened into a shallow yard surrounded by buildings of mismatched construction. Sheet metal walls backed against concrete shells. One half of a storage structure had collapsed inward, creating a ramp of debris that led to a second-story window frame. No one moved inside. No one moved anywhere. A few meters back, the rest of the team split off with a silent hand signal. Reagan had raised 2 fingers, circled once, and then pointed left. Gaines and the other 2 vanished behind the wreckage of an old truck bed, looping south toward the support side of the compound. That left Reagan and Harris to clear the central spine. They stepped into shadow, crossing from sun-bleached ruin into cool, layered darkness. The temperature dropped 3 degrees. The wind followed them in, stirring fine dust into curling ribbons that clung to the corners of the hallway. The floor beneath was littered with fragments, old wiring, broken glass, paper long turned brittle. With each step, the glass gave a faint crunch, even beneath careful boots. Reagan paused at the first junction. A half-collapsed archway led to a stairwell that descended at a sharp angle. She looked down once nothing but darkness and cracked tiles. No heat source, no movement. She tapped the door frame with the back of her glove, low and deliberate. Harris nodded. They continued forward. The hallway bent right, then opened into a corridor that had once been a barracks. Molded plastic beds lined the walls, stripped bare. At the far end, a door hung askew, metal hinges creaking slightly in the breeze. Beyond it, a rectangular courtyard shimmered faintly in the infrared overlay. Heat residue clung to the stones like ghosts. Someone had been here within the last few hours. Multiple someones. They moved toward the door. Harris shifted ahead, taking point with his carbine up and canted slightly left. Reagan covered the rear for 3 full steps before resuming forward lead. No one spoke. The only sound was breath hers, steady and even, and his tight and catching when the wind shifted direction. A sudden noise echoed through the air, thin, high-pitched, a child's cry. Both froze. The sound repeated closer this time, a wail mixed with coughing. It came from a side building just off the main corridor, behind a half-intact wall with barred windows. Reagan turned slowly toward the sound, eyes narrowing beneath her visor. She switched off infrared, switched it back on, no signature, no residual heat, nothing at the window, nothing behind the wall, just the voice. Harris was already stepping toward the doorway, weapon ready. His foot touched the threshold. Reagan reached out and pressed one gloved hand to his shoulder. No force, just pressure. He stopped mid-step. The crying continued. She stared at the wall, then the floor, then the window again. The delay between the sound and its echo was too long. It bounced wrong hollow, redirected, as if it wasn't originating from that room but from a speaker embedded elsewhere, maybe concealed behind the debris. She traced her eyes to a broken section of conduit running along the roofline. It ended in a square cut above the doorframe. Not normal damage. She took one step back, motioned Harris to hold, then crouched and placed 2 fingers against the dirt just inside the door. Dust, no compression, no footpaths, no drag marks. But the corner to the left showed a single point of heat, the kind left by metal, tripwire anchor or sensor pull. She didn't say anything, just stood. Her breathing remained steady in her mask, syncing now with the faint static pulse of her comm circuit. Not a word came through. The net was clear. Slowly, Reagan turned and motioned a retreat with 2 short swipes of her hand. Harris hesitated, then followed. They moved away from the building, shadow to shadow, until the sound faded behind them. She didn't look back. 10 minutes later, they linked with the other half of the team near a drainage culvert beneath the comms tower. No one mentioned the side building. No one needed to. Harris glanced back once, shook his head once, then kept moving. Reagan said nothing. Her face stayed still beneath the visor. But in the margin of her mental map, the building earned a marked sensor trap, likely bait. There had been no child, and no one else had made that call. The staircase was narrow and uneven, carved into the side of the foundation with more urgency than care. The last few steps descended into a low corridor, walls dripping with condensation where rough concrete met rusted conduit. The air shifted here cooler than above, but denser. It smelled of sweat, power residue, and old steel. Reagan Cole moved first, her boots brushing silently over pooled water that collected in the low points of the floor. Harris followed, carbine angled high to cover the stairwell behind them. They didn't speak. Her flashlight cut a narrow cone ahead, the beam dialed to its lowest lumen setting. It barely traced the edges of the hallway, revealing blank walls, a door slightly ajar, and a fuse panel beside it glowing faint green from inside. Power was still running unstable, pulsing, but live. Reagan held a clenched fist, then opened two fingers, signaling slow approach. Harris gave a nod. They moved in tandem, stopping just short of the door. No sound inside, only a mechanical hum. Reagan reached out and pushed it open with one fingertip. The chamber beyond was larger than expected, 30 feet across, 10 feet high, with cables strung haphazardly along the walls and overhead in loose arcs. Power strips hung by zip ties. Screens blinked in standby mode across one corner, and a bank of makeshift equipment racks stood half-toppled in another. In the center of it all stood a man, unarmed, eyes sunken and jaw bruised, holding his hands visible at chest height. "I'm the one you came for," he said quietly, "but they're the reason I stayed." Behind him, 6 figures sat or crouched against the far wall, civilian engineers by the look of them. One was missing a shoe. Another had her arm wrapped in what looked like the torn lining of a jacket. They looked at Reagan like people who hadn't seen anything clean in days. Their eyes weren't desperate, they were resigned. Reagan swept her light once across the room, then dropped it back to floor level. One of the engineers lifted his wrist. A faded plastic tag still hung from it, worn down to the fiber but legible. MK-28 control, restricted, Sevi. He didn't say anything, just held it out like a dog tag of his own. Another sat cross-legged beside a terminal, holding an unlit flare upright in one hand. It wasn't part of any system, just something to hold, something to wait with. The intelligence operative stepped closer. They made us start reprogramming the satellite array. Couldn't move the core, so they rebuilt around it. They're using relay boosts from here to fake uplink alignment. He looked at her, voice flattening. "We didn't finish it, but we bought you time." Reagan didn't respond. She let the silence settle, scanning the layout. The racks were held up by bricks. The floor was slick with pooled condensation. A tarp had been draped along the ceiling, nailed straight into the concrete to funnel runoff toward a rear drainage pipe. Someone had tried to make this place livable for a while, at least. She reached for her collar and pulled her dog tags out slowly, thumbed them once against her glove, then tucked them back beneath her shirt. Not a dramatic gesture, just final. This was no longer a mission, not officially, not by command. This belonged to no record now. She turned to Harris and gave a quick 3-part signal. Prep, exfil, load all, no delays. He didn't argue. He stepped past the doorway and began checking structural bracing on the west wall, where 2 ventilation ducts ran upward potential exit route. The engineers didn't ask questions. They watched. Reagan took one knee beside the man with the flare. She gently pulled it from his hand, checked its charge band, and then slid it into her side pouch. She looked him in the eye. He nodded once. That was all. The walls hissed faintly with electrical bleed. Somewhere deeper in the structure, a motor clicked over likely backup power resetting itself. The sound bounced around the chamber in hollow arcs. Reagan looked toward the back wall, tracking the drain path and the frame beyond it. Harris returned, breathing low. He gave her the thumbs up. She rose, gave the group one last glance, then said the only words she would speak for the next hour. "We're not leaving anyone." The surface air hit hotter than before, sharp and dry with the scent of scorched stone and the metallic tang of old wires stripped bare by sun and wind. Reagan climbed out of the lower access hatch, boots crunching on broken gravel as the wind kicked dust across her visor. Above, the compound had changed. Shouts echoed near the north wall. Short bursts of gunfire called out like warnings. Gaines signaled contact from the far flank, 2 down, unknown number approaching from the east. It was not a sweep. It was a stall. She stood still for 1 second, breathing through the filter mask, letting the information settle. The timing was wrong. No push to breach, no attempt to retake the engineers. Just pressure, noise, and disruption. A decoy. Reagan scanned the terrain to the south. A ridge dropped into a cut of old dry riverbed, lined with weathered stone. Beyond it stood the shell of a Soviet-era hydroelectric dam, abandoned in name, but never erased from tactical overlays. It had power lines still strung, half-collapsed towers listing like tired sentries. More important, it had elevation, line of sight, and a buried relay station large enough to bounce a signal burst off low Earth orbit satellites. That was the real uplink site, the one no one mentioned. She turned to Harris. He was adjusting a pack strap. Sweat slicked across his temple, jaw tight with effort and confusion. "We need to move now," he said, gesturing toward the approaching firefight. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before we're boxed in." Reagan handed him the mission tablet, still sealed, still active, then reached into her chest rig and pulled the small black chip holding the encrypted comms burst. It held the only data packet that could confirm what had been built and where. She placed it in his hand. Her voice didn't rise. "Get them out." Harris looked at her. "We're not leaving you here?" "You said." She didn't answer, just held out her wrist. He hesitated, then extended his own. She synchronized the watches in silence. No final nod, no closure, just data alignment. Behind them, the engineers climbed into 2 stolen technicals, trucks stripped down to frames, painted in haphazard camouflage. Gaines took the wheel of one. Harris turned and followed, still holding the chip. He looked back once, squinting into the wind. She had already turned away. Reagan moved fast down the slope toward the relay station. The entrance was half buried under a ledge of shale, hidden beneath collapsed scaffolding. She climbed over a tangle of bent rebar and ducked under the steel frame. Inside, it was cool, darker, the air still and thick with ozone. A backup generator pulsed once behind the wall, a low heartbeat of electricity waiting to be called forward. She found the secondary signal path, the hardline that looped from the buried relay hub to the antenna grid above. If activated, it could override even partial shutdowns. She reached into her satchel, pulled out the charge pack, and clipped it into the mount. The wind outside howled once through the entrance, sucking in dust and swirling it across her gloves. Sweat ran into her eye, stinging, but she didn't stop. She checked the timer, adjusted for load delay, and locked it to her synced watch. She stepped back, confirmed the placement again, and sealed the panel with a strip of metal wire. It wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds were rolling low from the east, flattening the light and dulling the contrast between stone and horizon. She climbed to the ridge above the relay, watching the technicals fade into the distance, wheels carving lines in dust. Engines coughing smoke as they disappeared behind a break in the hills. She stood alone. The charge ticked quietly behind her, hidden in the dark. She looked down once more at her wristwatch. The second hand passed the minute mark. Then she adjusted her sling, turned back toward the relay hub, and vanished into the cut. The first light over the Horn of Africa was gray-blue, washed out by dust and layered cloud. The sun hadn't cleared the ridgeline yet, but the uplink relay caught what little light there was, casting long shadows across the concrete apron. The relay tower leaned over the valley like a broken spine. Rust streaked the control shelter's walls, and the satellite dish above creaked faintly in the wind. Reagan Cole moved through the corridor of collapsed fencing, one boot over another, her carbine angled low. She had the terrain memorized, each dip in the slope, each line of broken stone that could be used for cover. Her breath hissed steadily in her helmet, loud against the stillness. The charge she had set earlier was active, set for detonation on manual sync, but the fallback signal path still had to be severed, manually, up close. A short burst of automatic fire cracked to her right, hard and low. Harris was down by the relay gate, chest heaving. He'd taken a round through the thigh. She was on him in seconds, dragging him behind a rusted vent shaft. He tried to speak. She shook her head once and tightened the tourniquet above the wound, wrapping it fast, yanking the cinch strap until he bit down hard. Blood soaked through the wrap in seconds, but the bleeding slowed. Reagan reached for his wrist, unfastened his watch, and synced it to hers. No words, just the press of fingers, the tap of confirmation. She slid it into her pouch, looked him in the eye, then tapped twice on the grip of his weapon. "Stay here. Don't move." Then she stood and moved out again. The first firefight broke before she hit the corner. Suppressive bursts from 2 angles pinned her behind a metal frame. One of the attackers moved fast, trying to flank. She threw a frag blind over the barrier. It detonated against the far wall with a sharp, dull thud and a flash that knocked the figure backward into view. She fired twice, clean and controlled. The second moved from the left, slower, more cautious. She ducked into a side alcove where the uplink grid's conduit cluster lay exposed. The cables ran thick as vines, crackling faintly with bleed current. She stepped over them, sliding the flare wire from her belt and wrapping it once around her glove. She pulled the trigger coil free and clipped it to the base of the nearest junction box. Static hummed up her forearm. Another burst tore past her shoulder, slicing metal from the frame above. She moved low and fast, crossing the exposed concrete in 6 strides. She dropped to a knee and returned fire 3 rounds, each one deliberate, no waste. The wind kicked up again, slicing through the cracks in the shelter, carrying with it the smell of cordite and sweat. Her breathing filled the inside of her mask, rhythmic and controlled, the only sound in the rising noise. Her visor flickered from the heat bloom. She blinked, adjusted the calibration, and kept moving. She reached the relay core and planted the secondary trigger. The first charge was already counting down. She pulled the synced watch from her pouch, checked the second hand, and placed it beside the detonator. Her fingers lingered for just a moment. Then she slid behind the relay hub, crouching into the curve of the wall, the metal vibrating under her back as the signal pathway surged one last time. Breath in, breath out. She opened the comms channel. A single burst. Package clear, asset cold. She reached up and powered down the unit manually. No beacon, no signal trace, no return link. Just silence. And the wind. The room was windowless, buried 2 levels beneath the Pentagon's south wing, lit by recessed fluorescence that gave everything a soft clinical haze. No clocks hung on the wall. In this space, time moved in report cycles and batch uploads. A junior intelligence analyst sat at her desk, flipping slowly through a thick packet stamped with a red priority band and partially decrypted header. Op-ext, Region 9, coordinate unconfirmed. She read in silence, pausing over a list of recovered personnel, 6 civilian engineers, names verified against international contractor databases, 1 intelligence operative, unnamed in the document, but confirmed by biometric match. The final line simply read, extracted via hostile resource, unauthorized method, no origin trace. No DEVGRU unit was listed in the deployment logs for that region. No special operations request had been filed, no exfil approval. According to the system, there had been no U.S. military presence within that grid during the week of the incident. The analyst tilted her head slightly, brows drawing together in a line of quiet curiosity. She marked the field unattributed extraction, flagged for SIGINT crossmatch. She turned the page and opened the next intake entry. It was short. A sealed evidence pouch accompanied the file. Inside was a scorched dog tag, chain partially melted, letters barely legible under the grime and impact scoring. A note in dry handwriting at the top of the form read, found near uplink relay hub. No body recovered. Tagged by local asset sweep. The tag had no matching personnel record, no dental, no DNA. The entry was logged under a generic bin. Unclaimed. Type 3. The analyst scanned the barcode into the terminal and placed the pouch into the designated return tray. She didn't ask questions. That wasn't her job. Several thousand miles away, in a rehabilitation ward inside a nondescript building on a Navy hospital campus, Harris sat alone on the edge of a recovery cot. His leg was wrapped tight in clean bandage layers, propped up on a brace. Outside the window, someone was mowing the grass, dull rhythm, short passes. He didn't look out. He unzipped a gear pouch resting in his lap, worn nylon, frayed at the corners. Inside was the watch he hadn't expected to see again. It was simple. Military issue, surface scratched, battery half drained, but inside the back cover, behind the latch, a strip of tape had been placed trimmed perfectly to fit. Written in block letters, faded from sweat and time, were 3 words. Hold 0, always. He stared at it for a moment, then peeled the tape back just enough to feel its texture, the way it had been pressed there by deliberate hands. He didn't speak, didn't move for nearly a minute. Then he folded the tape down again, sealed the latch, and closed the watch. Her name would never appear in the records. There would be no unit citation, no medal, no public line of acknowledgement. The packet would remain sealed. The tag would stay unclaimed. The extraction would be recorded as fortunate and unexplained. But someone always remembers. Someone always does.